Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay. So hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Love Show podcast. Shane Kohler here. As always, I look forward to being with you every Tuesday or Wednesday if you're listening to me on the podcast, and look forward to jumping in and diving in with everybody. Today, we have a powerful conversation lined up. We're going to be talking about loving without losing yourself and ending self-abandonment and embracing clear communication. So what I really want to talk about today are how do we stop the patterns of abandoning ourselves in relationship? And I was just saying to those of you who are with me on Instagram here, I was talking about how it's so common that we get involved with someone and, normally early on in the relationship, things are amazing, right? I mean, if it didn't feel amazing at some point, we probably wouldn't want the relationship, right? So there's usually a point or a period early on in the relationship where everything feels really amazing, where everything feels really incredible. And then as we move further on in the relationship, what often happens is the relationship starts to take more from us than it gives. And so many people say, like, I'm just trying to get it back to where it was, right? Or sometimes people say, when things are good, they're really good. But when things aren't good, they're really bad, right? But we get into this pattern of getting involved with someone, and over time, the relationship starts to take more from us than it gives us. Something I was chatting about with a client in my program recently is she was saying that, found herself in a similar dynamic like this. And she was asking, I know relationships take work, but how do I know what kind of work is worth doing and what kind of work is not worth doing? And I think a lot of us feel that way. We're like, well, it's hard right now, but relationships take work. And so we continue to give and give and give. And we think we're doing the work. We think we're doing what we're supposed to be doing to create a healthy, partnership. But the more we give and the more we give and the more we give, sometimes it feels as though a relationship just continues to take and take and take and take and take, right? And so I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about how do we know what kind of work is worth doing versus what kind of work is just exhausting, right? What kind of work is just going to take from us and take from us and take from us. And I want to talk about the fear of abandonment, right? And this is something that is so fundamental to who we are as human beings. This fear of being abandoned, this fear of being left, this fear of being disregarded or, feeling like we're not valuable or not wanted. And what it feels like when somebody leaves or even ghosts us, right? And this fear of abandonment that we have, that in attempt to avoid this fear of abandonment or in attempt to avoid the experience of being abandoned, we do all kinds of things to try to make sure that it doesn't happen. And so I want to talk about all of this today. And I really want to look at how do we show up in a relationship where we have clear, powerful communication, where we don't abandon ourselves, right? And where we attract partnership and people into our lives that have the ability and capacity to meet us where we are and form the kind of conscious bonds that we're looking to create. And so I'm looking forward to diving into all of this today. This is, a great topic. And it was inspired actually by a question that came in my community. And I've been doing that a lot recently, just really looking at the questions that come in my community and then using them as deep dive topics for the podcast, because I think it's one of the best ways to really get to the heart of what's going on for us. And so I'm going to read this question, or it was a share that was posted in my community recently. And I just want to start with this. And I know a lot of you will relate to this as I share it. And so this person shared with us, she said, I recently ended a 5-month relationship. I found myself crumble into old patterns of codependency, and I just couldn't get myself anchored. I want to learn more about this aspect of myself and the healing so that I don't carry this into another relationship. I don't want to lose myself or obsess about a partner. I want an interdependent type of relationship and to be able to communicate my needs effectively and feel secure in doing so without abandoning myself. So I just first want to thank the person who shared this. And for those of you who are with me right now, if you relate to what was just shared, tap that heart a few times. I want to know who relates to this. But I think this is such a relatable thing, right? It's something that all of us have probably experienced at some point. Many of us may be going through it right now, right? And this feeling that, when we get into a relationship, these old patterns tend to resurface. Right? These old patterns tend to resurface. And it's, some of us, when we're single or when we're dating, we get to a place where we feel so secure, right? We get so good at being on our own and feeling single and feeling comfortable and feeling confident. And then when we get involved with another person, it's like we revert back into some other version of ourselves. And it's like, who is this person? And where did this come from? Right? And I'm going to talk about that today, because something that happens when we become intimate with another person, and physical intimacy definitely can trigger this, but it's not just physical intimacy, it's emotional intimacy, right? It's any form of intimacy. But when we allow ourselves to be intimate with another person, something that happens is it psychologically and emotionally, it harkens back to our childhood relationship with our parents. And this is why I think, like me personally, this is why I love working in the domain of romantic relationships. I've done a lot of business coaching over the years. I've done a lot of different kinds of things, but I think I love working in the domain of romantic relationships because nothing gets in there like romantic relationships do. I mean, you might get rejected by your boss, or you might get some feedback at work, or you might have a difficult moment with a colleague. And of course, it hurts. And you'll feel that, right? But it doesn't hurt like getting ghosted by someone you were attracted to hurts. It doesn't get in there in the same way that our intimate romantic relationships do. And I don't think there's any area of our life that really gets right in there like our intimate romantic relationships do. And I think that's why I enjoy this work so much, is because nothing touches the core of who we are as deeply as these relationships do. I think, when we go to work, or when we're with our friends or our family, or when we're out in these other areas of our lives, we tend to keep these relationships at a little bit of an arm's length to a certain degree, right? We tend to keep a little bit of a distance in those relationships. Even if we love the people, they don't get all the way in there. But when we are truly intimate with someone in a romantic way, they get all the way in there. And as I said earlier, it harkens back to our childhood relationships with our parents. And so what's actually happening psychologically, and we're not consciously aware of this, right? Most of this is very unconscious. But psychologically, what's happening is we are experiencing our romantic interactions in the same way we experienced whether our needs were met or not met with our parents as children. We are reliving those dynamics. And so before I get too far into today's episode, I do just want to mention our 7-day Conscious Love Challenge. And I was just mentioning it earlier with those of you who are with me on Instagram. But for those of you who are tuning into the podcast, I want to mention it for you as well. It's going to start on Wednesday, December 4th. This is going to be the last one of the year. And I don't think we're going to have another one probably till February. So the next one's going to be a ways down the road. So this is your opportunity to jump in if you want to jump in and really start the new year off right. And something we're going to do in that 7-day challenge is we're going to look at the 8 wounded parent archetypes. And I think, really understanding these 8 archetypes and how, like, which ones were present in our childhood, which ones have been present in our past relationships. Like, these are such powerful things to understand, because it really gives you some insight into how you show up in relationships. When you understand the archetypes that were present in your parents as a child, and it doesn't matter if you came from a wonderful home or you came from a super abusive home, we have all experienced different versions of these because they're present in our world. Right? So even if you had great parents, it doesn't mean you didn't experience some type of wounding from one of these archetypes, because these archetypes are present in our world, period. And so even if your parents loved you and they did the best they could, they still embodied some of these archetypes. And so one of the days out of 7 days, and there's a lot of work we're going to do over 7 days, but one of the things we're going to do is we're going to look at each of these wounded parent archetypes and understand which archetypes were present in my childhood and my upbringing, and how did that shape my blueprint for relationships, right? How did the archetypes that I experienced in relationship with my parents as a child, how did that shape my blueprint for relationships overall? And when you see this, you're going to be like, oh my God, I finally understand why all my relationships are the way they are. It's just going to become so clear, because you're going to see that, wow, like, it makes perfect sense. This is how I learned relationships when I was younger, and this is how I've been showing up to them throughout my whole life. And it makes sense why I have the reactions I do, why I have the defenses I do, why I avoid what I avoid, why I lean into what I lean into, right? It just makes perfect sense. And so if you're live with me today and you want to join the challenge, just send me a DM on Instagram, and I'll make sure you get the information for it. If you're tuning in to the podcast and you hear this and you want to join the challenge, just look at the link in the show notes, wherever you're listening to this episode. Right below that in the show notes, you'll find the link for the challenge, and join us there. It's going to be 7 powerful days where we really understand healing and creating conscious love on a whole new level. You don't want to miss this. It's going to be the last one of the year. It's going to be your last opportunity to dive in with us. So make sure you join us for this one. It's going to be powerful. Now, that being said, I want to talk about abandonment wounds, because it is our abandonment wounds that cause us to self-abandon, right? We abandon ourselves to try to protect ourselves from our abandonment wounds. And what I want to say about this is that when we're children, and I mean, most of us, it's been so long since we've been children, right? It's been 30 or 40 years or more than that, right? It's been so long since we've been children. And I think we take for granted how dependent we really were. And even if you have children, and even if you see it in your children, it may not really land for you what that experience actually felt like. But like when we're a child, every aspect of our lives is completely 100% dependent on our parents. And I mean, if you were, and I mean, this is horrible, right? But some children actually are abandoned by their parents, and it means certain death. Like if you don't have a parent or a caretaker as a child, that is certain death. And again, when that happens, it's absolutely horrible. But I'm just trying to presence how deep this goes into our psyche and into our consciousness, and how hardwired this is into our nervous system. This dependence that we have on other people, and the fear, the deeply ingrained fear we have of losing that relationship. It's so deep. Like it gets wired into every fabric of our being, of our nervous system, of our bodies, of our psyche. And I mean, we start out as children. We start out as helpless babies, right? So from the time you're born, the dependence on other people and the need for them literally to survive and to live is getting hardwired into our system. Now, if you had really healthy, conscious parents, if you had parents who really understood what they were doing and really understood their job as a parent, then you likely became very secure. And so you had parents who created a safe environment. They gave you freedom to explore the world and know that there was always a safe place to come home to. They gave you insight and guidance without being controlling or without limiting your experience. I mean, and as those of you who are parents know, like, this is very hard to do, right? There's like a constant balance in like, how much freedom do you give? How much do you restrict? It's very difficult to do. And what I want to say is, if you had really good parents, then you probably became very secure in many ways. And this abandonment wound is minimal, right? It's the minimum that it could be. But if you grew up in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, conscious parenting wasn't a thing back then, right? Conscious parenting, like those parents, they were trying to survive. Like, they were trying to pay the bills and they were stressed out. I mean, like, I don't think conscious parenting became a thing until recently. I mean, maybe in some circles it was a thing. But, most of us who are adults now, who are in our 30s or 40s or 50s or beyond, like, we didn't have really conscious, aware parents who really understood what their job was and how they raise conscious children. Right? Most of us who grew up in the previous decades, we had parents who were just struggling to get by. They were living in survival. They were often tired and exhausted and frustrated. They were often in toxic or destructive relationships or marriages themselves. They were very unhappy, right? We often had fathers who were like not even in the house, or if they were in the house, they were like very emotionally avoidant, and mothers who were like overwhelmed and stressed out and emotionally dysregulated and all this stuff, right? And so if you didn't grow up in a very secure environment, if you didn't grow up in an environment where you felt very safe and very held, then what was happening for you was you were living with this constant feeling of insecurity. And as some of you think back to being a child, you'll probably remember this, right? This constant feeling of insecurity, this constant feeling of, am I going to be okay? And you develop this ability to like constantly tune in to your environment and figure out, who do I need to be to get love from my parents? Who do I need to be to get acknowledgement, to get attention? Some of us were like, who do I need to be to get fed? Right? And maybe not all of us, like a lot of us had parents who at least fed us. Right? But we developed this feeling of like persistent insecurity, a persistent lack of safety. And we were constantly tuning into our environment to find out, who do I need to be safe? Who do I need to be loved? Who do I need to be validated? Who do I need to be to get attention? And what do I need to do? And we're always looking to the outside world to find out how we need to be pleasing and get acceptance and approval. And so what happens for us when we grow up in this kind of context is self-abandonment becomes like a fundamental part of our operating system. Right? I often talk about this in my program. I talk about the idea of conditional love. Right? And conditional love is, it's just that. It's love that is based on conditions, right? So most of us grew up in an environment where we weren't loved and accepted unconditionally. We were loved and accepted conditionally. And a lot of our parents in the world they came from, they thought they were doing the right thing by being this way, right? They're like, we're teaching them how to be a good human. And, maybe now we're becoming a little more sensitive as people and we're starting to understand, well, maybe there are other ways to become good humans, right? Maybe it doesn't have to be through this harsh reward and punishment system. But most of us grew up in a reward and punishment system. Thanks for tuning in today. And if you enjoy the Conscious Love Show, there are a few things you can do with just a few seconds of your time that will really support us in being able to continue bringing these messages to you every single week, completely free of charge. The first thing you can do is give us a 5-star rating on one of the major podcast platforms. The two most popular for this show are Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but you can leave a rating on any platform where you listen to this podcast. And if you'd be willing to take just an extra moment, you can write a few words about the show and share with people how it's touched you and the difference it's made in your life. That will go a very long way in supporting our show. Possibly the biggest thing you can do to support the show is share it with someone that you know can benefit from it. If you get a lot out of it, it's very likely that a friend or loved one of yours will too. And I appreciate it so much when people share the show. If you wanted to take the extra step, you could post a link to today's show on your stories or socials and help get the word out in that way. If you'd be willing to take just one of these steps today, I would appreciate that so much. And I want to say thank you in advance for caring about the show and being willing to support it. Thanks again for listening today. Your presence here means everything to me, and I hope you continue joining me each week for many years to come. Lots of love, and let's get back to the show. Right? And if you were good, you were good according to what your parents expected and what they wanted from you, then you were rewarded. And if you were not good according to what they wanted and expected from you, then you were punished. And so again, self-abandonment becomes part of our operating system. From the time we were born, we were brought up in a system that taught us to abandon ourselves in order to survive in the environment that we grew up in. And now we grow up and we go to workshops and seminars and we take courses and we read a lot of self-help books and we learn about our attachment styles and we do all these things and we become very aware, right? We become very knowledgeable. We know a lot and we can see what's going on and we say, well, I'm not going to abandon myself. I'm going to be myself and I'm going to be true to myself. And right. And we do our affirmations and we do all of these things, which is all beautiful stuff. But then what happens is when we become intimately involved with someone, our nervous system doesn't respond with all this information we've acquired, right? Our nervous system doesn't respond with, oh, well, I know that I need to be true to myself. And I know that I need to speak my truth and set my boundaries. And I know that I need to walk away from what doesn't serve me. And yes, we've acquired all this information by watching reels on Instagram and by reading books and by going to workshops. We've acquired all this information. But when we get into an intimate situation with someone, our nervous system is not operating from all the information we've acquired. Our nervous system is operating from the things that got wired into us, the survival impressions that got wired into us as children. And so we think we're confident and we think we're strong and we think we're powerful, and we are. I'm not trying to take anything from anyone here, right? We are confident, we are strong, and we are powerful. But when we get into a relationship that is touching into those deepest aspects of ourselves, we start to revert back to the last relationship that touched those deepest aspects of ourselves, which again was our relationship with our parents. It's like we have a different framework for how we operate in the world in most of our lives and how we operate in a deeply intimate scenario. And so how do we heal this, right? And that's really what I want to address today. How do we love without losing ourselves? How do we end self-abandonment? How do we embrace clear communication? And as we approach this part of the show, what I want to say is you are, when you do this, when you approach this, you are touching into the things that are really like your deepest fears, right? Like you are touching into the aspects of life that you fear the most. And it's very scary, right? When you when you're in a relationship with someone and maybe you've been with them for 6 months, or maybe you've been with them for a year, or maybe you've just been with them for a few months or a few weeks, right? But when you're forming an attachment to someone and there is something that you need to speak into the relationship, something that is maybe going to rock the boat a little bit, something that might disrupt the continuity of what you've been doing with the person, something that may potentially cause them to leave or decide they don't want to be with you anymore. Right? You're not emotionally operating as the 35 or 45 or 55-year-old adult talking to another adult. Right? You are emotionally operating as a child talking to their parent. And you're not relating with it from a very realistic place of, you know what, I lived so many years without this person. If they leave me, I know I can live so many more years without them. I know I'm going to be fine. I've been through a lot. I know I can like handle it, right? Like, you're not operating from that very mature, grounded, rational perspective. Emotionally, what you feel is, if I disrupt this situation and this person loses interest in me and they leave me, I am going to be left for dead. I will not survive. Right? People ask me all the time. They're like, I ended this relationship and I know this wasn't the right person for me. I know it was a toxic relationship. I know I shouldn't be with this person, but why am I hurting so bad over it? And this is why. Because the adult, mature, rational part of yourself is saying that I know this was the wrong relationship. I know this wasn't the right person. I know they weren't good for me, right? Like, the rational mind can look at that and see that. But the emotional body, the nervous system that has been hardwired from childhood to avoid abandonment, is literally feeling like my parent just left me for dead. And now I'm dying and nobody's coming to save me. And so what we're really looking at here is a kind of retraining and rewiring our own nervous system. I was talking a little bit about the 7-day challenge earlier, and I just want to circle back to that, because something we're going to do in that challenge is I'm going to teach you and give you access to some processes that are literally going to help you do that rewiring. I'm going to guide you through some processes and teach you a few practices that are going to literally help you to rewire yourself in these most vulnerable moments, in these scariest moments. So there's a balance here when we look towards healing. There's a balance between understanding and having awareness of what we're dealing with, and then allowing that awareness to integrate on an emotional level. So you can't get there without having the awareness first. And this is why, the Instagram reels and the books we read and the workshops this is why this stuff is so good. Because it gives us a clear vision for where we could be. Right? It gives us a clear objective, a clear goal. Through awareness, we can intellectually understand, what does being secure look like? What does being secure feel like? Now, we may not be there all the way. It takes time. There's an old saying. They say that the greatest journey we will ever cross is the 12 inches from our head to our heart. Right? It's like the greatest journey we will ever traverse in our entire lives is the 12 inches from our head to our heart. And so that's really what I'm talking about here, right? Is that journey from your head to your heart. And it's important to have an intellectual understanding of, what does it look like to be secure? What does it feel like to be secure? What would a secure person say? What would a secure person do? How would a secure person think? Because as we develop that awareness, it can give us at least enough safety to approach those scary places. It doesn't mean they're not going to be scary. Right? Like there is no way, if you have a history of self-abandoning, right? If you have a history of pandering or giving people more than they've earned with you, or, if you have like an anxious attachment style or that kind of thing, and you're like always trying to prove yourself or always trying to gain acceptance. If you have a history of that, there is no way that you are going to change that pattern without being terrified at times. Because your nervous system, which is like your protection system, has been wired to say, this is safe and this is not. When you start attempting to do some kind of behavior that your nervous system says is not safe, your whole system, it's like alarm bells start going off. It's like, it's like somebody has breached the compound, right? It's like danger, danger, danger. That is a very normal and natural reaction to have in our bodies. This is the same thing that, if we were cave people and there was a tiger chasing us, this is the same thing that would say, run, there's a tiger chasing you. Right? It is built into us as human beings, and it is built into us for survival. So it has a place and it has a purpose. But for most of us, that part of ourselves has overextended its place and its purpose. Right? That part of ourselves has seeped into areas of our lives where it's not needed or helpful. Most therapists or coaches that you talk to will tell you that these patterns that we have at one point in our lives were absolutely necessary. Right? We needed to operate this way in order to achieve a certain thing, in order to create safety for ourselves, in order to get our needs met in some way. We needed to operate this way. But what happens is when there's a time in our life when we need to operate this way, and then we start operating that way, and then we get the external validation that says, yes, this is good, do this, act this way, behave this way, say this thing, do this thing. We start to believe that that is the only safe way to be. And so as we approach the boundaries of our operating system, it's going to set off alarm bells. It's going to be scary. It's going to challenge us. Something that is a big part of my work, and we'll address this in the 7-day challenge, those of you who are going to join us there, those of you who want to take it to a next level and work with me inside the Inspired Love program, but whatever capacity you're working with me in, this is a foundation of the work that I do, is understanding that we are only ever afraid of a feeling. You see, we think we're afraid of that person leaving, but you're not afraid of that person leaving. You're afraid of what it feels like when they leave. We think we're afraid of being ghosted, but we're not afraid of being ghosted. We're afraid of what it feels like when we get ghosted. We think we're afraid to speak our truth, but we're not afraid to speak our truth. We're afraid of what it feels like to speak our truth. We think we're afraid to walk away from a relationship, but we're not afraid to walk away from a relationship. We're afraid of what it feels like to walk away from a relationship. And so the question becomes, and the solution lies in How do I deal with these feelings? That's what it comes down to. How do I deal with these feelings? How do I regulate my nervous system when the alarm bells are going off? When I'm being triggered? How do I deal with this? How do I regulate? How do I self soothe? How do I find confidence and resilience in what feels like a never ending black hole? Right? When a relationship has ended and I'm lying in my bed and I can't sleep and I'm up all night just ruminating about everything that happened and wondering what I did wrong and what I could have done differently and why I wasn't enough and if I'm ever going to find someone and if I'm ever going to and on and on and on. Or when we cry at the gym or when we cry in our car on our way home from work. Right? How do I nurture myself in these moments? You see, we've been brought up in a system where it's like feeling good is good and feeling bad is bad. And most of us have operated in some form of that for most of our lives, where we chase the things that feel good and we avoid the things that feel bad. And you've probably noticed in yourself or in your life that the more you chase the things that feel good, the more it leads to things that feel bad. Right? It's the other side of the same coin. And the more that we avoid the things that feel bad, the worse those things get. So we spend our lives just trying to chase whatever feels good and avoid whatever feels bad. But the more we chase what feels good, it leads us to things that feel bad. And the more we avoid what feels bad, the worse those things get. And the more we try to operate like this, the more it compounds and the situation becomes impossible. Right? I have a beautiful marriage with my wife. We have a very loving, very supportive marriage. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. But I can't tell you how many times I've felt bad over the last 8 years we've been together. And that doesn't in any way take away from the marriage that we have and everything that's wonderful about it. But we couldn't be here without all of that being part of it. If I had been in this relationship trying to avoid everything about it that felt bad, I would have sabotaged it a long time ago. And a lot of us do that, right? We get into a relationship where it feels good, it feels good, it feels good, and then it starts to feel bad, and we go, oh, this is the wrong relationship. If it was the right relationship, it wouldn't feel bad. Rather than developing the resilience to sit in the fire like that and work through something with someone. And yet there's a limit to that, right? There's a limit to how long do I sit in the fire? And at what point have I sat in the fire long enough and I realize that this fire is just burning me alive and nothing good is coming from it? And so what's needed to prevent self-abandonment, to prevent self-sabotage, to grow into a conscious relationship with someone is our willingness to face the borders of our comfort zone, to face the parts of our nervous system when those alarm bells go off and it says, don't go there, don't say that, don't do that. And to do it anyway. To say it anyway. A quote I have often referenced, and I wish I knew where this quote came from because it's such a good one and I use it all the time. And I don't know who said it. It might be an anonymous quote, but it says to speak your truth, even if you do it with a shaking voice. right? I have had clients where they've needed to approach something in their relationship and they're like, I can't even begin to imagine how I would communicate this to my partner. And so I say this, then here's what I want you to do. I want you to write it down when you feel safe. I want you to write it down and I want you to read the letter to them. And you just say to them, you say, look, I'm terrified right now. My nervous system is in like a full-on reaction. I don't know the right way to communicate this or how it's going to come across. So this is what I need to do. I've written it all out on paper and I just need to read it to you. And no, that's not perfect. It's not eloquent. It's not graceful. But it makes sure that what needs to happen happens. Another quote, and I don't know where this came from either, but another quote I've often heard is that perfection is procrastination. Right? Perfection is procrastination. If you're waiting until you get it perfect to do it, you're just avoiding the discomfort of the situation. Because here's the thing, it really doesn't matter if it's perfect, because this is what matters, is when you're in a relationship with someone, that person either has the capacity to see you and hear you and understand where you're coming from, or they don't. And if that person can't see you like reading your letter, and they can't see like how afraid you are to communicate that, and they can't respond to that with warmth and understanding and compassion, that relationship has zero chance. You might as well just end it now. And we might feel so much shame around that, right? Like shame around, I can't communicate this clearly, or shame around, I'm afraid to communicate this. But what you're really doing when you do that is you're embracing vulnerability. And you're willing to let the other person see you in a vulnerable state. And you're willing to experience how they're going to respond to that, for better or for worse. But there's a fundamental, like, human thing that when we see someone in that position, it should awaken warmth and compassion. If someone sees you in that position and it doesn't awaken warmth and compassion, you need to lose that person quickly. Because they're probably a narcissist, honestly. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to agree with everything you say. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't be some more discussion around it. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't maybe be some challenge in where you go back and forth and you discuss it and you find if there's a way to work. And it doesn't even mean the relationship is going to last, right? It may be incompatible. But even if it's incompatible, that person can still receive you with warmth and compassion. That person can still see your heart and your vulnerability, and they can honor that by holding a safe space for it. And that's just a fundamental thing that is needed in a relationship. Now, what you say in that letter or in what it is that you need to communicate, that might trigger them. That could happen too. And again, as I said, it might create some discomfort in the interactions where you need to go back and forth and you need to discuss some things. So it doesn't mean just because you did it, it's going to go over smoothly. But the question is, does this person have the capacity to engage in this kind of interaction with me? Or do I need to spend the rest of my life with this person tiptoeing around and making sure that they never really see me? Making sure that they never really hear my truth. And I see a comment. Casey says, I think that they just don't have the capacity to process their own emotions, much less someone else's. Well, I'll admit, there's a certain degree of readiness that we need to bring to a relationship. And in the same way that I say you don't have to do it perfect, they don't have to do it perfect either. Neither one of you have to do it perfectly, but at the end of the day, can you find a place of common ground? See, it is messy. It just is messy. There's no way around it. It doesn't have to be clean. It doesn't have to be neat. But in the interactions with each other, when you make yourself vulnerable, can you get to a place of common ground? And if you can't, then you lack the ability, or one of you or both of you lacks the ability to truly have a conscious relationship. And so, as you develop the ability to face the fear, right? And part of this is really learning how to be with yourself in your discomfort, developing the resilience to face those things that you're afraid to face, whether it's being rejected or being ghosted or losing someone or walking away from a relationship or having an uncomfortable conversation or whatever it might be. Right. But whatever it is, when you face that, first is the willingness to face it. And then the second thing is the ability to process the emotion that comes with it. And this isn't something we learn overnight, right? This is something that we practice and we practice and we practice and we practice and we practice. And I'm not going to say we ever become masters of it, right? Where, I mean, maybe we do at some point, I don't know, but like, it's never like, oh, everything I need to communicate in my relationship is done with perfect calmness and perfect clearness and without any kind of frustration or any kind of discomfort. And I'm totally secure in every interaction. I mean, like, I'm not there with my wife. She's not there with me, but we don't need to be, because we have the ability to face our discomfort, to bring things into our relationship, to hold space for each other, even when it's not perfect, and to discuss it and find common ground around it. So it's not about getting to a place where, oh, I never feel uncomfortable about anything and I'm perfectly regulated all the time. Oh, that's honestly like unrealistic and unlikely. And if you find yourself there, wonderful, but you don't need to be there. It's actually unnecessary to be there. But what's necessary is to start operating from a place where you no longer avoid those things. When there's something that needs to be said, you say it. When there's something you want to ask for, you ask for it. If that leads to the end of a relationship or a separation or a difficult moment or an argument or something like that, then you are willing to embrace wherever that leads to. Right? I used to think fighting was bad. I had a friend of mine, and I love this person, and he has a beautiful marriage, and I'm not saying anything about him, but I had this friend of mine who used to say, I've never had a fight with my wife. And I was like, oh, wow, like that's what a marriage is supposed to be like. And then, I would have fights with my wife and I would feel ashamed for it. Because I'd be like, oh, well, I'm not supposed to be fighting, so there's something wrong with us. And I don't know the inner workings of his partnership, and I'm not commenting on that. But what I found within myself was that our fights were a good thing. And as we grew in our relationship, our fights have gotten less and less volatile. They've become more like discussions. The more secure we both get, right? Fights don't need to be ugly, but they are a good thing. Fights in a relationship, and maybe the word fight is a strong word. Maybe we could say a disagreement, or maybe we could say a difficult moment that's shared with each other, right? But it is the moment where the things that you are withholding in your private worlds are brought into the light of the relationship so that they can be integrated and healed within the relationship. And that is always a good thing. And whether you're 2 weeks in or 2 months in or 2 years in or 20 years in, it is always necessary to bring these things into the relationship. 2 weeks in, your ability to bring that to the relationship is shaping the future that you will or won't have together. 2 years in, it's solidifying the foundation that the two of you are building your relationship on. Right? Yes, healthy conflict creates real intimacy. See, we think of intimacy as like sex and passion and kissing and long conversations that last all night. Fighting is intimacy. Right? And again, maybe healthy conflict is a better word than fighting. But it's actually really vulnerable to have a disagreement with your partner. It's really vulnerable to challenge the relationship. And vulnerability creates intimacy. So I want to go back to what I was saying. First is the awareness of all of this, right? Everything we're talking about today, if you listen to podcasts, if you read books, if you watch Instagram Reels, all of that falls into the domain of what I call awareness. And awareness is a beautiful thing. It gives you clarity. It gives you understanding. It gives you something to aspire to. But awareness is not practice. Awareness is not an embodied reality. Awareness is an idea. It's a perspective. And it's important. It's powerful, right? You need awareness. Awareness leads to practice. And practice leads to embodiment. So once you become aware that I'm only afraid of a feeling, I'm not afraid that that person's going to leave me. I'm just afraid of how I will feel when they leave me. I'm not afraid of getting ghosted. I'm just afraid of how I feel when I get ghosted. I'm not afraid of, fighting with my partner. I'm afraid of how it feels when I fight with my partner. Right? Once you become aware of that, that can give you the courage to practice. And practice is what you do in those difficult moments. If it means I'm going to write it on a letter and I'm going to read it to my partner because I'm too afraid to look them in the eyes and say it, then that's how you practice. And maybe after you read the letter a few times, maybe you don't need to read the letter anymore. Maybe you can actually look them in the eyes and say it. Awareness leads to practice, right? I'm going to face the discomfort and I'm going to practice through it. The more you practice, the more embodied you become. And so I do just want to say one more time, as we're touching on this aspect of the conversation, what we're going to do in the 7 days challenge that starts on December 4th is that I'm going to teach you a series of practices that you can use in these moments. I'm going to teach you how to regulate your system. I'm going to teach you about interchild reparenting. Right? I'm going to teach you about all these things so that you have practices you can use in these moments. We're also going to do a lot of awareness work, right? I'm going to show you the the wounded parent archetypes that show you your blueprint for relationships and intimacy. I'm going to show you the 4 psychological habits that we use strategically to limit intimacy in our lives. right? So the 7-day challenge is going to be a combination of awareness and practice. And that's going to give you the practical tools that you need to approach these difficult experiences and instances in a relationship. So awareness leads to practice, practice leads to embodiment. And embodiment is the natural expression of it. So I want to touch back on something that I spoke into earlier today, was that relationships take work, but how do you know what work is good work versus work that's just exhausting? This is a question someone asked me recently. She said, I've been staying in this relationship and it feels like it's hurting me, but I've been staying in it because I feel like, relationships take work and I don't want to run from the work. I want to lean into the work. And I've been talking a lot about that today, right? Leaning into the work. And a friend of mine, I was talking to him, and my wife and I, this is when she was still my girlfriend. This is years ago. But we were going through some difficult times. We had a long distance relationship, and the first year or so of our relationship was pretty tough. We went through a lot of ups and downs. And I remember it was during one of those ups and downs, and we'd been together maybe 6 months or something. And I was talking to my friend, and I said to him, I said, should I keep doing this? Like, I don't know. Is this worth it? And I was like, how do you know when you're done? And he said to me, I'll never forget this. He's like, well, how do you know when you're done eating? And I was like, well, I guess you just know. And he's like, you just know. And he's like, so it doesn't sound to me like you're done yet. And I think when you're done, you'll know. And here we are 8 years later, I'm not done yet. But what I thought was really powerful about that, and I want to take it to just another step. How do you know when you're done eating? You feel it in your body. And if you're disconnected from your body, if you're not in tune with your body, then you might overeat. Or you might not eat foods that are healthy for you. Or you might eat a bag of Cheetos and then still feel hungry afterwards because you didn't get any real nutrients. And so it's the same thing too. How do you know when the work is good versus not good? How do you know when the work is leading somewhere versus the work just exhausting you? You feel it in your body. And how do you feel it in your body? Through practice that leads to embodiment. Right? So I said awareness leads to practice. Practice leads to embodiment. And when you are embodied, you can intuitively understand your truth. So maybe you've been leaning into a relationship, and you're giving and giving and giving, and the relationship is taking and taking and taking. How do you know at what point it's time to step away from it? Because this is part of self-abandonment, right? If you're leaning in, and it's taking, at a certain point, if you continue leaning in, you are now abandoning yourself. So how do you know when enough is enough? You know through becoming embodied. As you start to, because the mind, let me put it this way, the mind says all kinds of stuff. The mind says stay, the mind says go, the mind tells you to go, and then when you go, the mind beats you up for leaving and it says you should have stayed, right? Like, you know what this is like. The constant rumination in your mind, the constant, is it right? Is it wrong? Should I do it? Should I not do it? Did I make the right thing? Did I make a mistake? Did I blah, 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 right? The mind will tell you all kinds of stuff. You can't really find truth in your mind. The mind is always responding from fear. The mind is always trying to get what it wants and avoid losing what it has. That's the nature of fear, right? I'm afraid I'm not going to get what I want, or I'm afraid I'm going to lose what I have. And the mind is always responding to fear. The body speaks truth. The more you practice, the more embodied you become. The more embodied you become, the more you have a sense of your own truth. So how do you know when you speak up? You know because you feel something in your body that says, I can't let this go. I need to say something. Right? What they said or what they did disrupts a fundamental boundary of mine, and I feel that in my body. And so I have to say something about it. I have to create that boundary. This relationship is not meeting some of my fundamental needs for connection. And I feel that in my body. And so I need to ask for something. This relationship, no matter how much I put into it, is taking more than it's giving. And I feel that in my body, so I need to walk away. You can only get there through actual practice. You see, our intuition is wisdom. It's not information like we collect in our minds. It's truth. It's our truth. It's like our soul speaking to us. And what we learned in childhood was to become disembodied, right? In the beginning of today's episode, I spoke about how we are wired for self-abandonment from childhood. Self-abandonment comes with being disembodied, because when I disconnect from my body, I live inside my mind. I'm always living in a response to fear. I'm always in a survival response. And I'm not connected to the truth that is alive in my body. And so by becoming more attuned to my feelings, by becoming more attuned to my emotional reality, by learning to regulate my nervous system through challenge and embrace the challenges that I'm afraid of, I start to develop the ability to live more in my body and therefore become more in touch with my intuition and my truth. I start to be guided by strong, intuitive, and emotional pulls. And so that's how we know. And so what I really want to leave you with today is a few ideas. One, this process is not comfortable because it literally involves facing and embracing the things that you are not comfortable with. Right? Intimacy does trigger our relational patterns, our wounded patterns. Being intimate with another person does trigger that. And we really have two choices. We can, as I said earlier, chase what feels good and avoid what feels bad, but that only leads to a compounding of our problems. Or we can embrace what feels good and embrace what feels bad. I'm not saying it's all bad. A lot of it's very good, right? But we embrace all of it. And as we practice embracing all of it, and this isn't seamless, it doesn't happen overnight. But I will say this, and this is what I've seen in myself, I've seen with all my clients, people I work with, is that, if it took you 30 or 40 years to learn this, to learn the survival patterns, it might take you 3 or 4 years to undo them. The undoing happens much quicker than the learning. So that's the good news. That's the good news. But it doesn't happen overnight. It is a process. It is an uncomfortable process. But the more you are willing to face that, the more you are willing to be resilient and regulate yourself through discomfort, the more you become attuned to your own truth. And what starts to emerge inside of you is a kind of inner dedication that absolutely refuses to abandon yourself. It's like you start to get to a place where you just will not do it. And this isn't something that we think our way into, right? And that's what I want to make sure I make clear here. It's not like you're sitting around ruminating in your mind going, should I say something? Should I not say something? Your body starts to speak. You start to feel this strong pull in your soul that's like, I cannot not say something. I care about this person. I like them. We've shared a lot together, but this relationship has become so hurtful to me that I have to leave it. I can't possibly stay anymore. And so that's what I want to leave you with today. I do want to open up for a few questions. I've seen some questions come in, so I'm going to go back and take a look. If you have questions, go ahead, drop them in the chat. I do just want to say, again, I've been talking a little bit today about the 7-day Conscious Love Challenge. That begins on December 4th, so in about a week. If you would like to join me for that, go ahead, shoot me a DM on Instagram. Or if you're listening to the podcast today, you can check out the show notes right below this, and you can sign up for the challenge there. We do have a special right now. Early enrollment is $35. So make sure to take advantage of that. And I'm going to look through and see any questions. If you have questions, drop them in the chat, and I'll take as many as I can today. So Odea is asking, how can I stop needing love and validation from another person? Usually I just stay single for a while to heal, and I would get to the point when I feel a lot more self-sufficient, but as soon as I enter another dynamic, I feel just as needy as before. I hear you, right? And we've been talking a little bit about that today, how we can feel very confident and secure when we're single and when we're dating, and then we get involved with someone and all of those patterns come up. And so I've talked a little bit about the process today, right? I've talked about the process of embracing the discomfort, the process of learning to regulate and integrate through your emotions and through those uncomfortable experiences, and learning how to regulate your nervous system. So I don't want to reiterate everything I've just said today, but what I want to say is that you learn to work with it in a relationship, right? So after you've been single for a while and you've healed and you feel like you've gotten to a good place, that's wonderful. When you re-enter into a relationship, you want to enter into it knowing that, okay, there might be some, rush of dopamine and some, being on cloud 9 for a little while, and we might feel like we're madly in love. But ultimately what's going to happen over time is this relationship is going to face some challenges, right? Ultimately what's going to happen over time is we're going to face some difficult experiences together. And what I want to do is be mentally and emotionally prepared to lean into those experiences. I want to be mentally and emotionally prepared to do the work in relationship. I've often said that we heal in relationship. We don't heal in isolation, right? We can develop a lot of awareness in isolation. We can learn a lot of information in isolation, but we heal in relationship. And so this is one of the reasons why my coaching program is a group program, because when we come together and we're in relationship with each other, that creates an incredible opportunity for healing that we couldn't do if we were just reading a book, right? So there's a healing that happens in relationship that you cannot do on your own. And you can get to a certain place on your own, right? Like, yes, you can learn how to be with your feelings. You can learn how to be with your loneliness. You can learn how to face rejection. You can learn how to embrace, more confidence and things like that. And there are certain things you can do outside of a relationship, but the real healing happens within a relationship. When you are able to stay in those intimate, vulnerable places with someone and be seen and held within that. And you're able to express your truth and have it received. And all of this is very healing, right? So what I want to say is the next step for you, and you don't have to rush it, you can get there when you get there. But as you choose to re-enter into a relationship, you want to do it with the conscious awareness that I am going to lean into this relationship and really do some work. And you'll see the relationship triggering aspects of yourself that were not triggered when you were single. But that's not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. It is giving the opportunity for healing. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the question. So I just want to encourage you to embrace what comes up in a relationship, not always need to retreat back to that safe place when you're alone, right? Learn to find your way through that discomfort into the safety that you can feel inside of a relationship. And thank you for the question. Beautiful question, Odea. So I'm going to start with this question from Caroline. She says, I've been trying to get out of a 7-month thing based on potential and tried to leave it and end it several times. It seems like the only thing is to block and move on to end the cycle. But then I feel evil and harsh. And what if I'm the problem and I could change? And so it goes on and on. And then you say, so what do I do? Spinning around and tired of it. Logic, leave versus naivety. What if it will get better? What if I'll regret it? Yeah, got it. Beautiful question. Thank you for asking. So you've been in a 7-month thing. You've come to the clarity that you want to leave it, but then you start to feel harsh and you feel like the only way to do it is to block it. I don't know the details of the situation, but I'm assuming like if you try to communicate to him that you want to end it, and then he's going to try to, keep coming back. And so you feel like you need to block him and that feels harsh. I want to say that like it's important. And on the topic of self-abandonment today, which this is very relevant, it's important to understand that we don't owe anybody anything, right? And I really want to presence that, like, we don't owe anybody anything. And so this idea that for you to block him is harsh, it's not harsh. Now, you don't want to ghost him, right? You don't want to act like he doesn't exist or disregard his experience. So you could say something like, I wouldn't just block him without saying something first. Like you could say, and you probably already have said, I don't know, but you could say something to the effect of like, listen, I need to take a step back from this relationship because of X, Y, and Z. I felt that it's not good for my emotional or my mental health, or I need space right now, or whatever your reasons are valid, right? They're valid. And so it's not harsh to take care of yourself. And you can tell him like, I'm going to go no contact. I'm going to block your number. It's not about you. It's nothing against you, but it's just that I really need a clear break so I can clear my head and move forward. So I just want to go no contact for a while and I'm going to block your number. I hope you can understand. Now, he might get angry about it, but it's not your responsibility to manage his anger, right? It's not your responsibility to deal with his feelings when you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. As long as you've been kind and considerate and honest and clear, and you've let him know where you stand and where you stand with him and what he can expect, you don't owe him anything. You don't owe him never making him angry. Now, I know you addressed the naivety, like what if it gets better? What if you regret it? Right? And I know that can be really seductive, right? It can be really seductive to think like, well, if I just hang on or if I just try some more, it can get better. And what I want to say is like, people show you who they are, right? And so again, I don't know the details. I don't know why you're choosing to leave. I don't know what's going on with this relationship, but I do know this, that people show you who they are. And if he has shown you what you can expect from him, and you feel like whatever that is less than what you need or less than what you want in a relationship, he's not going to suddenly be different. If he was going to be different, he would be different already. Now, again, there's a lot of nuance here, and I don't know exactly what kind of conversations you've had with him. I don't know exactly the nature of the relationship and everything that you've shared, but this is what I know, is that if he has shown you what you can expect from him, and you say that's insufficient for you, that you need more than that, or that you're looking for a different kind of relationship, or whatever that is, it's okay to do what you need to do to honor yourself and let him respond to it however he's going to respond. It's not your responsibility to deal with that. And yes, this requires giving yourself permission to put yourself first. And we've been trained throughout our lives that that's not okay, right? It's not okay to put myself first. I need to be considerate of everyone else's feelings and their needs. There's a relearning to say that I can only give when I'm well taken care of. And so if someone else isn't taking care of me, the first thing I need to do is take care of myself. And I can only give from that place. So hope that supports you, Caroline. Hope that supports. Sending a lot of love your way. Um, I don't know if if my answer is going to automatically change things for you. I don't necessarily expect it to, but sometimes the way we learn is through pain. Right. And so when this dynamic becomes painful enough, you will end it. And sometimes we don't end it until then. But the more we grow, the less of a tolerance we have for pain. Right? The more we grow, the less of a tolerance we have to entertain things that are below us. And so you may need to hurt a little bit more in this situation before you become totally ready to let it go. And if that's the case, I respect your process. But hopefully, as you go on, your expectations get higher and higher and your tolerance for pain gets lower and lower. And something that comes with that is the trust and the awareness that I deserve that. Right? I deserve to have that. And so it's possible for me. And so all the fear of, well, if I leave him, can I find something better? Like all of that starts to leave you, right? We start to become aware of being alone is better than being in a bad relationship. A lot of us think that a relationship of some sort is better than no relationship. Growth is when we recognize that being by ourselves is better than being in an unfulfilling relationship. And if I'm going to be in any relationship, it needs to be fulfilling, because if not, I could be perfectly happy alone. And so I hope you find that place, and that will be where your motivation to disconnect and honor yourself comes from. Beautiful question. Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. I'm going to take this question from Shakira. She says, I've been seeing someone for 8 months and it's been the bare minimum with low-level communication, but I'm still hooked on this guy and still okay with minimal effort. Why am I okay with this? Thank you so much, Shakira. Thank you. And so similar answer to what I just gave is that, I mean, I'll give some basic answers, right? Like, why might you be okay with this? Well, historically, you've been taught at some point that that's what is okay, right? There might be, as I was just saying in the previous question, you might not be clear yet that it's better to be alone than to be in an unfulfilling relationship. So there are certain habitual patterns that we learn throughout our lives, and a lot of it comes from our parents, a lot of it comes from past relationships. But there are certain patterns we learn about what we deserve, what we're worth, what we can accept. And we will always find ourselves in relationships that reflect what we believe we deserve. And so if this is the kind of relationship you find yourself in, on some level, this must be what you believe you deserve. Because if you didn't believe you deserve this, then you would walk away. Part of what comes with recognizing your worthiness, like when you are really standing firm in your own worthiness, then something that comes with that is you expect the same from everyone else too, right? When I know what I'm worth, I'm not going to allow someone else to show me less than that. And if I do allow someone else to show me less than that, then I must not understand what I'm worth. And so, again, very similar to what I just said in the previous question, is sometimes we need to experience enough pain before we recognize it. Sometimes there can be something happening where what was I going to say? Sometimes there can be something happening where we, damn, I totally lost my train of thought on that one. Well, let me just say this. When you get clear, and I know I just said this, but I want to reiterate it here. When you get clear that it is better to be by yourself than to be in an unfulfilling relationship. Oh, this is what I was going to say. I just remembered. Sometimes there's something happening where our lives in and of themselves are not that fulfilling. And I don't know if this is you, Shakira, and I don't want to point a finger where it's not applicable, but I'll say this for you or for anyone it may apply to. When we don't have a lot of joy or fulfillment in our lives in and of itself, then we sometimes look to the excitement that a relationship brings as a way to get that joy and that fulfillment. Now, I know this relationship is not joyful or fulfilling for you, but it creates some drama. It creates some excitement. It creates some action, right? It gives you something to think about. It gives you something to feel about. It gives you some interest and some intrigue. And so if you don't have something in your life outside of this relationship that is engaging and fulfilling and exciting and inspiring for you, if this relationship is like the most exciting thing that's happening in your life, then you may be inclined to just keep it around because life without it feels dull and mundane. And this is part of what we've got to grow into when I said earlier that it's better to be alone than it is to be in an unfulfilling relationship. Well, there's a caveat to that. And the caveat is if you love your life. And I know this can be a sensitive topic, and I know this can be sometimes a difficult thing to admit or to own. And I want to be very compassionate as I present this. And I've been there, right? I'm always in the process of bettering my life, and there are aspects of my life that are very fulfilling and aspects of my life that are not. And I've been at a place in my life where I had nothing really going for me. So I know what it's like to be there. And at that time, I was in toxic relationships. Why? Because at least they mixed it up a little bit, right? And so I say this knowing what it's like to be there, and I say this with a lot of love and compassion, that when you choose to cut this off, there will be, some emotional fallout and you'll need to grieve the loss. But what I want you to do is start putting your attention on, what am I really passionate about? What is really going to light up my life? What are the hobbies, the activities, the friendships I could build? What are the things that can keep my interest and keep my excitement going, and the new ways I can have to meet people that would be deeply fulfilling for me? And as you start to put your attention on that, rather than looking to find a relationship to bring that to you, relationships start to be formed out of that passion, out of that aliveness. And so that's what I want to direct you to is, this relationship is going to need to run its course. You're going to need to get to a place where you clearly see that you're better off without it than with it. And maybe that time is today, maybe that time is next week, maybe it's sometime in the future. I don't know when that time will be for you. But when you get clear about that and you finally let this go, I want you to really start to put your attention on making your life the gold, the gem, making your life itself the reward. And that will naturally raise your standard for relationships. Because if you're happy and fulfilled in your life on its own, then you're not going to tolerate a relationship that lowers the quality of your life. You're only going to be willing to make space for a relationship that enhances it. And I think that's just such a fundamental thing. So lots of love, Shakira. Thank you for the question. Lots of compassion. I hope you can receive that and in whatever way is going to serve you most. Lots of love and blessings to you. And thank you so much for the question, Shakira. Princess Janet is asking, the way this guy was pursuing me for 1 month, making love declarations for me, as soon as I said I need the love and commitment first before the sex, he broke it off with me. Why would he do that? Obviously, I'm not him. Obviously, I can't know his reasons for doing things. But based on what you're saying, it sounds like he was trying to love bomb you to get you into bed. And again, I can't know that for a fact. But, somebody who is pursuing you for 1 month, making love declarations for you, that sounds like what was happening. He was love bombing you to get you into bed. And if you had slept with him, he probably would have disappeared right after that. And I don't want this to be, I don't want this to sound like it's a representation of how men are. It's not. But it may be a representation of how this guy is. And there are men out there who do this. And what I want to say is first, I want to acknowledge you for maintaining the boundary, right? I want to acknowledge you for not being swayed by his declarations of love. Um, I always think it's a red flag. And so I just want to say this for you or for anyone who may be going through something similar. I think it's a red flag when someone is making declarations of love for you very early on, or when someone is really gassing you up and with a lot of compliments are okay. You look really pretty, or you seem like a wonderful person. Like those things are fine. Compliments are okay. But when someone's really gassing you up with a lot of words, I think that's a red flag. And, I want to give you this to keep in your back pocket, or for anyone who relates to this. Like when someone starts doing that, I would say to them, honestly, you don't know me well enough to be doing that. Right? Like you're making declarations of love for me, but you don't know me well enough to love me right now. And if you love me already, either you're lying to me or you don't really know what love is. Right? I think it is so powerful to interrupt someone's BS like that and just let them know that you're not going to sway me with flattery, right? You're not going to sway me with pretty words. No, this is what I want to see from you. I want to see consistency. I want to see you showing up and making a sincere interest in this relationship. I want to see you showing up with effort. And I don't care if you met me twice and you're in love with me because of the 2 times we've hung out with each other. That doesn't mean anything to me. What means something to me is you showing a sincere interest in building something, being consistent and showing up. And so I just want to offer that as a way to call someone out on their BS and let them know that you're not going to be swayed by that you're not going to fall for that doesn't really mean anything to you. And it sounds like, you might not have done it in those words, but it sounds like you did it, right? You're like, okay, well, these love declarations are nice, but I'm not going to do anything until we have something real. And, that's the point where I'm going to be comfortable getting into bed with you. And he's like, oh, she's going to be too much work. I'm out of here. Right? Well, good. Good that he's out of there and you did exactly what you needed to do to make sure that he's gone. And, I give this advice to women a lot, and I know it's a tough position for women to be in, right? Because of course, you might want to have sex with him too. And a lot of women say, well, why should I have to be the one to hold back when, I want it just as much as he does? Why shouldn't I be able to go for it as well? And first thing I want to say is you can do whatever you want. I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't do with your body or sexually. But this is the thing. It's not all men. There are a lot of men out there who sincerely want a relationship. But there are men out there that will do exactly this. And I think it's advisable for a woman who wants a long-term committed relationship to hold back a little while and find out who the guy really is before she is willing to get into bed with him. Now, if you're just looking for a good time and that's all it is to you, I'm not going to say it's wrong to do it. Do whatever you want. But if you're looking for a committed relationship as a way of protecting yourself and honoring that level of intimacy that you want to share with someone, I think it's important to wait. And again, it sounds like that's exactly what you did. So I know it hurts, right, when somebody does this. And I want to send you some love and just compassion for what you're going through right now. I'm sure with the declarations he was making and the things he was saying, that probably got you excited, right? That probably made you believe there was a future there. And then to see him just do this, it's a shitty thing to do. And I know it sucks to be on the receiving end of that. I want to send you some love and compassion for that. I want to acknowledge that you did an amazing job of knowing what you want and maintaining the boundary and communicating about that. And, this is the reality that when you communicate a boundary, the people who cannot honor that boundary are going to fall out of your life, right? Sometimes we have family members fall out of our lives when we create a boundary with them. So it's just the way it happens sometimes, right? And so lots of love. Lots of blessings to you. You did an amazing job here. I know you're going to experience some emotional fallout from this. And what a great time to regulate your system, right? What a great time to develop some resilience and to develop some confidence in yourself. And I know it's not easy. So lots of love to you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for sharing with us. I want to say in closing, thank you to all of you. Beautiful questions today, beautiful shares. As always, it's a pleasure to connect here. I do want to shout out one more time. Conscious Love Challenge is beginning on December 4th. If you're with me live today, make sure to shoot me a DM and I'll send you the info for it. If you're listening to the podcast, make sure to check the show notes below wherever you're listening to this episode, and you'll get the link to join there. Lots of love and blessings to everybody. You're all amazing. Love you all. I'll see you back here next Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern time. Podcast will be uploaded next Wednesday morning. And I'll see you then, everybody. Take care. Lots of love. See you soon. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @TheLivingRelationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.